You are listening to the Amplifying Leadership podcast, where we explore what great leadership looks like through real stories, actionable takeaways, and expert conversations. I am Tara Lehman, founder and CEO of Amplifying Leadership, here to help you lead with intention and influence. Thanks for tuning in to today's guest episode. Today, I am welcoming Kursten Faller, founder of Centric Business Consulting. Welcome to Amplifying Leadership.
Thanks, Tara. I'm happy to be here.
And I'm happy about this topic. I don't think it's really come up specifically before. But before we get into that, let's learn a little bit about you, your leadership story, whatever you'd like to share.
Sure. Well, I'll try to keep it brief here because it's been a long and winding journey. I
Okay.
started my career trained in a highly technical role. I'm trained as a professional engineer and started my career there. And I started to run teams of people pretty early on after a couple of years of practicing as an engineer. And it was a tough time because I really ran smack face first into the wall where
Oh.
I couldn't get, I mean, I could get great results, but it was through sheer determination and force.
Hmm.
And it was astonishing to me back then to realize that people didn't see things the way that I did. Their motivation for doing the work was quite different than mine.
Hmm.
And I got a lot of reward and enjoyment out of doing things that maybe I didn't fully understand, but learning along the way and doing things under a lot of pressure and seeing the results was quite engaging for me. And, seeing that other people didn't see it the same way, they had their own internal motivations to do work was a pretty stark reality to have to face. So
Hmm.
it sparked a passion for me to figure out what builds performance in teams because I figured there had to be a better way, even though we got good results financially and schedule wise. Again, lots of stress and through sheer force and too much work on my part. I believed there was a better way, but stubbornly, like many technical people, I kept doubling down on more certifications and training from
Hmm.
project management to risk management to portfolio management. I just went from certification to certification until I stumbled into social psychology and neuroscience.
Oh, interesting.
And that's where the rubber really started to meet the road. So I took a course that maybe some of your listeners are familiar with called Crucial Conversations and remember thinking, wow, the narrative and stories that I have going on in my mind aren't fact and they aren't what everybody else thinks. That was a real
Hmm.
eye-opening moment for me. So since then, I've kept doubling down in that space. And once I started to understand more about human behavior, things got a lot easier.
Hmm.
So that takes me to where I'm at now, which the 10 years preceding where I'm at now, I had built a boutique consulting firm and realized in hindsight that yes, it did well, and you know, we made a successful business out of it. It was really a laboratory where I could study human behavior in my own organization as well as with
Hmm.
my clients. So coming out of that, I've wound um, that journey down a couple of years ago and have repositioned as a solo consultant in an advisory role, typically for C-suite folks, but I do work with project teams as well now and all levels of leadership in organizations. So that's how I got here.
Excellent. Excellent. And I love that you brought up the people part of things because that's a lesson that most leaders don't get taught. Excuse me. They don't get taught, but they learn fast, right? Because just like that people side is so important. It really, really matters. So glad you
Right.
brought that up as part of your lessons learned. We're going to shift today and we're going to talk about ownership of our work and really owning that. So first of all, let our audience know and maybe explain a little bit, what do you mean of ownership of our work?
Sure. So many of your listeners have probably thought or even said out loud, why can't my team just figure this out on their own? And
Yes, I'm
end up,
sure.
yeah, getting into the box with their teams and answering questions and directing traffic and thinking that they're being helpful. I mean, that was certainly part of my leadership journey. But when we're talking about ownership, what we're talking about is people owning the outcomes that we're targeting, we're moving towards, and those are different depending what level of the organization you're working in. But really, to unlock that ownership that everybody, I think, hopes that they have, uh, our job as leaders is to create the environment that opens that up. And just like I
Agree.
talked about in the beginning, how people saw work differently than I did, and the reward they got out of it was different than mine. That's the intrinsic motivation that we have to understand, and it's unique to each
Hmm.
person. So if you take the step to believe that your job as a leader is to create the environment, you also need to be able to understand what is motivating person by person. I think that's a big
Hmm.
mistake we make is that we try to generalize.
Yeah.
Even, honestly, I think a lot of leaders struggle with empathy is one of the most important things that I come across, and that's truly understanding what somebody's going through on the other side.
Hmm.
We could probably talk about it a bit more in the discussion here, but being able to understand where somebody's at is a game changer and moving beyond what you just assume. And then also going from a generalized approach to your team members, understanding case by case, like why are they at the
Hmm.
table? And I look at it like Venn diagrams. The organization needs something out of the role, and
Hmm.
people are there for a reason. And you as a leader also have your own reasons. So you're trying to build enough alignment between each perspective so that you can create an environment that opens up people's potential. And you can never force ownership. You can force accountability. You
Hmm.
can you can mandate somebody needs to put in their timesheet or that they need to show up on time, but it's
Hmm.
typically the most rudimentary tasks that you can drive accountability for. Ownership is 100.0% a choice for each
Hmm.
human being. You can't force it. So all
Yeah.
you can really do is try to open up their potential by creating that environment.
And I have to say, I love that you brought up the motivation piece because a lot of leaders I talk to are missing that important people connection, right? Is we're not the same. None of us are. And our motivations are completely different. A lot of leaders think motivation is, oh, they get a paycheck. That's not the true uh, motivation in most cases. It's very individual and very personal. And so I, like you, I say to them, well, what's motivating your employee to come to work? What's motivating them to want to finish this project? Find those things out, and you have more that people-centric workforce that you're alluding to. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. If we look at it through the lens of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, coming from an industrialized view of the world where the workplace and people are part of a machine, we would believe that things like the pay or
Hmm.
the time off or the pension are motivators. They're actually not. And it's proven through research that the threshold where that motivation drops off is quite low in terms of pay. It's not a significant
Hmm.
amount of money. And most of us working in knowledge work, our teams would be paid beyond that threshold already. So it's really about the intrinsic motivation, which is different for each person. That's the unlock
Hmm.
to everybody's potential. And I don't talk about this because uh, it's just nice to have these environments. This is truly where our organizations will outcompete others. It's about
Hmm.
performance, and it's always an and conversation though. It unlocks performance of the team, which helps the organization, and I find it's also much better for the humans involved too because they get to go where they want to go.
Yes,
So it's never
absolutely.
one, yeah, it's never one at the cost of another perspective. I typically find that it unlocks value to everybody involved.
I 100% agree. I mean, when we're happy and motivated to do what we want to be doing to get the results, we're going to do more for you. We're going to give you 110 to 120%, right? I mean, it's
Right.
important. Let me start with some challenges first, because I'm curious what you think about when we don't allow that ownership or we don't find out those individual motivators. What are the challenges that teams and leaders see?
Sure, that's a good question. So what symptoms I would come across in the client organizations that I work with would be work is stalled or slow moving.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that could be because decisions aren't getting made and it's not completely overt. It sounds like things where people say, we don't have the data yet. We need to go back and collect more data, right? Or we need more
Mm-hmm.
clarity. So you'll see slower work, you'll see deadlines missed, you'll see uh, costs escalate. You'll see failed initiatives. I mean, I was involved with a retail client that had a major transformation, tens of millions of dollars that they put in to try to unlock more client value and increase their profit, and they had to abandon it at some point.
Oh,
Largely, they
wow.
don't understand. Yeah, they don't understand. They didn't grasp why, but it's largely in part because of what we're talking about. The environment had so much
Hmm.
friction in it that they couldn't deliver enough value to support continuing with that investment.
Yeah,
So that's a few things.
and to add to that too, I see perfectionism come out a lot, right?
Oh,
That slow
absolutely. Yeah.
progress and perfectionism needs now, like you were talking about gathering data, but then we want more data to prove something, and then we're going for perfect, and it just delays everything. So I agree with that.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about perfectionism is it's something that it's kind of insidious because we reward it in society
We
highly,
do.
right?
Hmm.
My wife's a medical doctor, and she's a perfect example of that, where she has been able to get to that level of achievement in terms of her education and professional work because of some of these things like um, ruthlessly trying to be perfect and trying to make sure she knows everything, but it gets in
Hmm.
the way of progress. And this
Hmm.
worked for decades because our world didn't change a lot. I
Yes.
mean,
Yeah,
I'm
agree.
in my mid 40s, and most of my life has been a pretty stable place and period of time, but that
Hmm.
really changed since COVID hit. And my co-author Alan trademarked a term called "no normal," and he's convinced that we're not going
Yeah.
back to normal anytime soon. And I think he's right.
Yeah, I
So,
agree.
so this is why we need to embrace what you and I are talking about here, is because the business environment changed. It
Hmm.
changed
Yep.
substantially 6 years ago, and the
Yeah.
pace of change is faster. We have to be able to adapt faster, and that's why these things like perfectionism really gets in the way of working effectively in today's world.
And I coined a quote: perfection waits, progress works.
Perfection
That
waits
is
and progress
progress
works.
works. It's a quote of
Yeah,
mine. I think it has to speak to so many things, including this. Because my
right.
next question I want to bring up almost leans to that a little bit, where as leaders or business owners, sometimes we hold on to everything and we fear giving ownership of something to our team members because we want to hold on to all of that. We want perfect. So we're not allowing them ownership of things. So, how do we take leaders who want to own everything because maybe they're a perfectionist or because they're worried about, what may or may not go right if they let go? How do we encourage them that they need to let go of everything and give some sort of ownership to their teams?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, your question is how, and first of all,
Hmm.
it's important to know that if you don't, the why this is important is you're going to completely demotivate your team, because the intrinsic motivation we've been talking about comes from, for many people, things like autonomy,
Hmm.
ability to make their own decisions. It's unique to each person. There's many aspects to that. But if you're a perfectionist and you're latched on to control, I mean, that's micromanagement. You're going to demotivate your
Hmm.
team. You're going to move slower. You're going to have less creativity. The threat in the environment is going to be higher.
Hmm.
Right when we need our best cognitive abilities, you're the one who's pushing them into threat brain, and they've lost
Hmm.
everything that you need to solve problems and be innovative. So that's the why. But your question is how. Um, One of the things I like to frame up for leaders is we are not surgeons with a patient's life in our hands on the operating table in front of us.
Hmm.
And that's a piece of wisdom I had to learn earlier in my journey, because if you let go of that belief, you give the team space to take a more windy path and make
Hmm.
mistakes along the way. But it is very uncommon for those mistakes to be so catastrophic that it would have a material effect on the
Agree.
business or even your business
Hmm.
unit. I mean, even in my own organization, I've had situations where, I've had losses of tens of thousands of dollars because of mistakes. And,
Hmm.
my firm was 12 people at the peak. I mean, that's a fairly big hit to a smaller operation like that. But I can tell you
Hmm.
that none of that was ever catastrophic. And the costs of trying to control to prevent that one outlier of a situation is far higher than the situation itself because you're demotivating everybody every day. And the loss in
Hmm.
productivity is an order of magnitude bigger than those losses. So you have to set aside this fear of loss, and it's really a scarcity mindset thing,
Hmm. Yeah.
believing that resources are so scarce, or our reputation is so sensitive that if our team makes a mistake, it will hit on us. The threats are different for leaders. It could be a status thing, it could be something else, but really you have to let go of that thinking. And when you do that, it opens up a coaching approach where you can start to truly build people's confidence and critical thinking skills. So those two
I
things are in
agree.
short supply in the world, particularly critical thinking.
Hmm.
But alliance-based organizations are basically absent of critical thinking. The magically uh, anointed leaders who have the superior intellect and knowledge, we hold them out to know what to do in every situation and we follow their lead. It's just a bunch of
Hmm.
nonsense. And I can't, I mean, I've lost count of the time. It will be thousands of times, even with my own team, where even though I believed I knew what the answer was, I waited and gave space for the team to work on it. And they came
I
forward
love that.
with ideas I
Yeah.
couldn't have even thought of that were even better.
Yes, that happens a lot. They have better ideas sometimes because they're working there, right? We can think we have the best idea. Sometimes it's not the best idea or the
Absolutely.
best money wise or whatever that looks like. Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
that's
Go
another
ahead.
how is set aside your own belief that you have to make the call and you have the right answers. You can always circle back after your team's talked about
Absolutely.
it and change the direction if you need to. But you cut out all of that discussion and creative thinking and potential if you go direct drive to sharing your answer and your
Mhm.
direction.
And coming back to a couple things, like you talked about making mistakes, really important for growth and learning. I mean, you can't be innovative and creative if you're not willing to accept some risk. And so that's a really important point that you made as well. But also flipping it to the leaders, when we give away some of that ownership, we become less stressed and less overwhelmed because we're not holding on to it all the time anymore, right?
Right. Well,
Yeah.
remember my story that you asked me to
Yeah.
share at the beginning. That was my story through sheer heroic effort. And that's a real barrier for leaders is that our worth and ego gets attached to
Hmm.
our heroic efforts of saving the day all the time. You have to let go of that because I knew there had to be something more in terms of team performance, but also it was self-serving. I knew that there had to be a lower stress way to be able to do my
Hmm.
work. And as potentially, maybe confessing that I'm a bit on the lazy side and I try to find more efficient ways to do things. This is what you have
Hmm.
to do. You have to let go of that because if you don't, you have to accept you're going to live a pretty stressful life and everything's going to be riding on your shoulders and it's not going to change until your thinking changes.
So I have a question for you because I'm sure you've met some leaders like this, and I know I have, is that letting go of ownership feels big. It feels scary. Are there some small ways that they can get rid of some ownership that doesn't feel so big? Like if they don't do this, is there something small they can give away as ownership? So one example I usually would say is, well, can you give them, a budget of say they need something under $1,000, they don't need your approval as long as it's within budget. Do you have ideas like that where they could get comfortable towards giving away more ownership?
Right. So you're really onto something here because I'm a big advocate for experimentation.
Hmm.
And the best ways that you can reshape your own thinking are to design deliberate experiments that are low risk situations that
Hmm.
allow you to grow your own thinking. Because what we're really talking about here is emotional recalibration as much as anything,
Pretty much, yeah.
right? And so if you don't take that approach of, I call it exposure therapy, to your own response here, you're not going to change it. And you certainly don't want to do it when we have high stakes, maybe health and safety on the
Yeah,
line or
fair.
significant money. So you're right. It's very small experiments and delegating a budget and letting people go away. Like, what's the worst could happen with $1,000 budget? Like $1,000.
Exactly, right? Yeah.
Like, and even if the worst case happened and you lost the $1,000, what is the value of the learning for all involved? It's far more than the $1,000.
I agree. I agree. And so I have another question then. So, our team members, maybe they're not used to this. You're giving me a budget. Why are you giving me a budget? So how do we take it from, okay, the leader is now willing to give up some ownership to the team actually accepting ownership of something like that?
Well, Sharon, what you're talking about is a telltale sign of a organization where people don't feel safe, right? That's a fear.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know that people are consciously understanding that, but it feels uncomfortable and likely their mind is going towards, well, I could be blamed for that if that goes wrong. It's safer to deflect it back to the leaders.
Hmm.
Um, those are the moments that are going to define, I call it the unwritten rules of what it means to be part of that organization or that team. We've all got the mission, mandate, values up on the wall, but these are the moments where you actually show people believe what they see, not what they hear or read.
Hmm. Yes.
Those are the moments where you got to show up as a coach. So that's
Hmm.
where the empathy is important. I might say if I picked up on somebody being uncomfortable, even if they didn't verbalize it, I might lean into that and ask some questions like, um, if I got silence, I might say something like, what do you think your next step is to just diagnose? Are they stuck? Are they uncomfortable here? Where
Hmm.
are they at? And then if they start to share why they're uncomfortable, then you've got to make the steps smaller for them because if the step's too
Hmm.
big, people freeze. And
Exactly. Yeah.
that's where, yeah, you leave the conversation thinking, yeah, that was a great conversation. We're all aligned. And then you come back a week later and nothing's happened,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So, try to understand it through their lens. The worst thing you can do is be judgmental and try to force somebody, right? I see
Agree.
that all the time. If somebody shared, well, you know, you're trusting me with that. I don't know if I'm ready for that. And then the leader will just respond and tell, well, it's not a big thing. Like, don't
Hmm.
be worried about it.
Dismissing it.
It just
Yeah.
dismisses it, and you've never landed. I call them micro agreements that we need to be forming every moment.
Hmm.
We need to leave those conversations with an agreement, even though it's not written on paper. We need to have agreement with how we're going forward. And you, as the leader, need to be diagnosing where somebody's at and confirming, like, have we actually landed agreement here?
Hmm. Goes back to
So,
being individual with everybody, right? Just like as we were talking with the motivation is individual.
yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I like David Rock's work on this because he's got you know, just in understanding behavior through the lens of reward and threat is a big unlock rather than
Hmm.
people being robots. But if you take it further, David Rock adds in 5 dimensions of threat and reward.
Hmm.
So each person will have a little different profile when it comes to that. And status is one of the ones that I come across quite often, right? So to your point, you got to
Hmm.
understand what the threats and rewards are to each of your team. It's unique to each person.
Hmm. Yeah, good starting points too. Start to understand the people that you're leading first before give and if somebody does say that's too much, recognize it's too much and give them something a little smaller until they're willing to take it on. And like you said, it's really about creating that safe space where people can speak up, where people can take ownership and not feel that they might be reprimanded if something goes wrong, right? It's letting them know it's okay. We're testing this out or whatever that looks like. So I think that was a great way of putting that safety in there because psychological safety is just as important as physical safety. Absolutely.
Sure. I can give you a quick example too if it
Sure.
helps to hammer the point home. Yeah. So, I mean, even with my own team, I had a new person come on board one time who was so uncomfortable that they were even uncomfortable sending an email outside of the organization.
Oh,
And I
wow.
realized they would come into my office and they would They would show some light emotional distress, and this is where leaders get drawn into solving those problems and doing other people's work.
Hmm.
Right. So in that moment, when you understand somebody's uncomfortable and there's some kind of threat there around sending an email, which is probably fear of judgment or saying something wrong or being,
Hmm.
sized later, you can't judge that. Like for you and I, it's not a big deal, and we wouldn't. It's
Hmm.
so small, we wouldn't understand that. But the moment you show up judgmental, you're not helping the person move forward. You've lost all of
Hmm.
your influence in that moment.
Yeah, and you need to keep the trust. If you want to build this ownership for them as well, you have to keep the trust.
Right. And that's where
Absolutely.
leaders
Yeah,
get
yeah,
frustrated, right? Well, why
yeah.
can't you just write an email? Well, you got to slow down to go fast. You've got
Exactly,
to realize
exactly. Good point.
this person's stuck. It's threatening to whatever is going on with them. Let's just move a little slower here because momentum and forward progress is better than a standoff and heels dug in.
Exactly, agree.
Yeah.
So I think we could talk about this all day, but we do need to wrap up. So is there any big tip or key takeaway or something that you wanted to say about this topic that we haven't yet covered?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could talk about this all day and there's all kinds of things. I would say look at your interactions with your team members as an opportunity to ask more questions. I think leaders
Hmm.
spend far too much time making decisions and telling, and then getting frustrated when the team can't get there.
Yeah,
You got to look at your role in terms of a coaching role where you're there to create the environment, and you do that by asking questions. And good questions are typically what and how questions,
yeah,
because you're guiding people through their critical thinking process that maybe you've already got, but they don't have yet. And those are the moments where you actually help people grow and help
yeah,
them move into ownership and build a skill so that they can do it successfully.
yeah. Be curious, but listen. And listen is the big piece they miss too. But yes, listen and then take some action. Great points today. If there is a way to find you online, if our audience wants to learn more about you, is there a way they can do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn and Kursten Faller. If you search for that, you'll find me. And then my website's at kirstenfaller.com, and you'll find my recent book release there and more
Excellent.
information about what I've got going on.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Like I said, we can continue talking all day. It's a great topic. But thank you for sharing the tidbits that you did today. Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure being here. And I can assure all of your listeners that if I can do it coming from a highly technical background and the least human engineering profession of industrial systems that exists, anyone can do it.
I love that. There's encouragement for everybody. Of course, listeners, we want to thank you today for tuning in. We do hope you gained some valuable insights or practical takeaways from today's conversation with Kursten. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving us a great rating or review. It is one of the best ways to support the podcast and help us and Kursten reach more leaders with these meaningful stories, excellent tips, and advice. If you are looking to clarify leadership priorities, build strong teams, or empower those around you, I'm here to help. Explore our solutions, offers, resources at amplifyingleadership.ca, because leadership is better when we do it together.